Good evening. You're listening to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight, I have from the Great Midwest RDV. And tonight, I also have Pixel, the young 20 something, also from Central Florida. As usual, everybody knows I'm broadcasting from the Pine Hills Palace in the Extreme Studios just west of Orlando, Florida. And tonight, we're continuing our asymmetric scheduling of the James Bond franchise review going in order. We're up to 1985's A View to a Kill, starring Christopher Walken, the last movie outing with, of course, Roger Moore as James Bond himself. And gentlemen, as a child of the 80s, I like to sit there and say that I remember this very clearly. I will tell you this, no matter what we get into talking about this film, I don't think it's very good because it's very weak in the third act, and I don't really particularly care for the whole bad guy sort of thing. And that being said, people loved this film, and they did not mind Roger Moore being old. Those are the big things I have to say about it starting off, but it's pretty successful. Duran Duran's song was a big hit at the time, and so Bond was only leaving the thought in people's minds of who's going to do it next after that, which we'll get into on the next one with Timothy Dalton, obviously. So let's go around by seniority and go to RDV and get your initial thoughts on The View to a Kill.
All right. Like I said, I actually liked it. I think you're kind of over harsh, maybe because you're older. I don't know. Because you've seen.
What did I say that was harsh?
Like you said, this was kind of the weaker films, the third act. I actually liked it. Him teaming up with the I forget who the chick is in here. I think she's from Red Sonja, isn't she? The black girl at the end. She's one of the villains.
Grace Jones. I don't know.
Is it Grace Jones?
Is who you're talking about?
Yeah.
From Conan 2.
Yeah. Conan 2. Okay, I always get confused because there's Red Sonja and then that. So, I thought she kicks ass in here as a bodyguard.
She's great.
Yeah, and like I said, always the third act where basically the underground base, is falling apart. I always like this. It said the music was great with this movie. I thought this was one of Roger Moore's best Bond films.
Interesting.
Because he was less of the pretty boy and more had to do more action. There's the fight scenes, the running around. I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
The Bond girls were weak though. I'll give you that.
Okay. Yeah, Tanya Roberts actually makes her big screen, not debut in here, but she's been known as a B-level actress, and to get a chance to star as a Bond girl was very prominent at the time. Quite the looker, too, but it's interesting that you say that, and also said that I was being harsh, because there's definitely some strong things about it, but I think you hit on something pretty interesting. And the Bond formula, as Professor Brooks and I have talked about a lot, will get mentioned here as we get towards the end, but that leads us to you, young 20-something Pixel. Was this a first watch for you, since you're the one that we have the reason to be watching all the James Bond films, since it's a part of your movie education?
Yes. Well, anyone who's been on the channel knows that you and I have gone through everything that we can so far. We have some more to go, but with Roger Moore, I've always enjoyed his performances. I'm really surprised about how your reaction was to it, Rob, because I actually felt like the third act here was fairly strong. Like, for once, it's fairly strong. It doesn't fall apart. It doesn't go away like, okay, we got to end this somehow. And, Jaws just suddenly appears with Dolly in space.
The problem I have is it's kind of like Ninja and You Only Live Twice. It just doesn't seem to work in a Bond film to me. Like, to me, the whole idea of blowing up Silicon Valley, it's not very scary. It's not very whatever. It's just sort of there. And guys, you're going to hate me for saying this. While everybody, for some reason, overly loves Christopher Walken, I think he's pretty forgettable in his role here. And he's got some typical lines. He's got his interesting backstory, which was kind of cute, but he just does not feel very strong as a villain to me. That's the meat and potatoes of it right there. It really, really is. And it's a shame, because I think the first part of the movie, the first act, or the detective part of it, as we like to say, there's some really strong stuff in here. And RDV, I'll go back to you. You talked about some more strongest outings, maybe, but the stuff all in Paris with the fly fishing and going up to the Jules Verne and Eiffel Tower and all that, this is all badass. This is really good shit. I'm loving the look of the film and the feel of it. I'm going, I don't care if he looks a little older. His timing, everything about him, everything is spot on too. I mean, I just, again, I have an issue with the third act a lot in Bond films, so that's just kind of me. So, I mean, the setup of the film, what did you think of it?
Like I said, it's been a while since I've watched this movie, so I can't remember the beginning of the film, but I just remember the Duran Duran opening. This was more a Pixels thing. I just joined in because it's been one of my favorite movies for Bond. The the things I most remember is the third act, and just remembering as far as the girl, the blonde, was kind of like not really one of the solid actresses that he's had in the past, especially with a lot of the Bond girls. Grace Jones steals the whole entire roles for the female roles in this movie.
I agree with you. She's a powerhouse.
She's a powerhouse, yeah. And then as far as I believe his name is Max in this, isn't it? It's supposed
Max
to be
Zoran.
Max Zoran,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
she's
Max Zoran.
Mayday.
And Max Zoran, Christopher Walken, is actually kind of creepy in this. Like I said, he's one of those guys is like, he's charming and like that. And then when you find out his motive, it's like, oh, you piss him off. He gets he's like this crazy bipolar. He just switches. He's just like, he's ready to kill you. And you don't trust him. The plot to blow up the whole Silicon Valley actually was at the time, because Silicon Valley was kind of like, it was just with the IBM and all the other companies were first coming together and stuff in the late 80s or mid 80s, to say. So if you is one of the things that Silicon Valley computers, you could collapse the economy a little bit. And then, like I said, like, there's always a plot with California. If Lex Luthor wanted to basically sink California and and create a new beach, So it's always a crazy plot like that. I know.
Who doesn't?
And it fits the Bond thing, because that's the Bond villains are always the diabolical, like overzealous. I'm going to do something so drastic, It's like, realistically, there's no way you get away with that. Someone would notice, There's no one. Like I said, like that's the space one, the Moonraker. It was like, what the heck is that crap? The space Nazis? Like, that was crazy. So I mean,
repopulating the Earth.
Yeah, to say that his Silicon Valley wasn't that great, and I'd say it's a little bit more realistic than the Moonraker thing.
Well, no one's going to argue Moonraker with that too. I mean, the whole.
But I like that you bring up the fact that Roger Moore being older than this, like I said, and I can't help it going to he's probably the same age as Connery, right? As was in his later films.
Well, Connery, they brought him back for Diamonds Forever, and I haven't really looked at the age of either. I always felt like Connery mailed it in on that one.
Yeah, and like he was much slower in this, and you look at the Saint, basically Roger Moore in this. He's more active than Connery was in his own Diamonds Forever movie. In that movie,
Moore's in his mid to late 50s.
Yeah,
in this one. So wow.
And like I said, him doing the stunts, dealing with the girl, trying to survive because they're on the run. Like I said, it was fun. I really enjoyed it.
And what it is that when you do talk about the third act, like, I feel like in comparison to many of the other ones that we go ahead and talk about, like, okay, let's just wrap this up. This one is constantly flowing. Like, they go into the mines and then Max goes ahead and backstabs everybody, and then they have to get out of the mines, bringing the bomb. The blimp from earlier goes ahead and gets blown up, and they have to rush in because Max is going to take his revenge by stealing the blonde.
I will say that it's one of the last Bond films I can recall off the top of my head that kind of go back to the World War II, Nazis, experiments, human stuff, and all that, because he and his lover Mayday, the Grace Jones characters, are kind of permanently juiced, which is kind of cool because, of course, we'd seen Rocky IV by this point too with Dolph Lundgren. So that was kind of something in everybody's mind, like, oh, they can really do that? That's kind of cool, right? And, we see some scenes where it's like it. But the whole idea here is that, they mentioned chips, they mentioned this whole idea. So they were good at kind of, at the time, popularizing this idea about computers being prominent. We mentioned before in other movies on the Xtreme Movie Show, especially during our 80s reviews of films, that the idea of them shoving robots and computers and trying to make them mainstream. I'm not going to say starting with war games, but that was very prominent. It was a thing. Mm-hmm. So I think they're pretty spot on about it. So what it is if you have a chip, obviously that's an electrical device, so it's subject to electromagnetic fields. So if you have what's called an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse, it can destroy it. Hence, instead of being analog, if you have a digital device, you can screw things up. But he finds a chip basically that can withstand it, and so this kind of leads him into it. So it kind of reminds you a little bit of the Fabergé egg, where the one 00 agent recovers it. Now he's got to pick up the pieces and figure it out. So the thing that I thought starting off was really strong about this was that he has the Mr. Avenger himself, Patrick Macnee, in here as his like butler following him, and he goes undercover
My
with
man.
Bourne Industries, pretending that he's got to be like a horse buyer. And there is some really great back and forth between him and Walken. Like there's the scene. It's reminiscent. I'll bring it up of the Connery film, the last one. Actually, no, You Only Live Twice, where he's posing as a industrial agent trying to buy vitamin C, and they're trying to have this go back and forth. So, if you've seen Bond films now, a lot of these are like recreated, right? And John Glenn always has certain things in it. So, some of the best lines he has going against Christopher Walken, which is pretty strong about, like was the fly fishing one, where he talks about. When he's trying to sneak out, Mayday goes to capture him, and the Mayday has to act like, she's with him. So he goes in there and screws her. And the next morning when he's going to go see Max Zorn, he's like, I trust you had a pleasant evening, Mr. Bond. And he's like, a bit restless, but eventually I got off. And I'm like, I love how no matter if he's almost 60 years old, he can still pull that off. And that's something Moore does great. And so this whole back and forth, I know what you are, but I can't really say it. That's usually the best part of some of these Bond films. And him and Tibbetts, the name of the Patrick Macnee character, them breaking in and discovering everything is pure Bond. And so the detective part, like a lot of the Bond stuff, I really, really like. And again, the stuff with Mayday, finding out she's strong, and the whole Eiffel Tower thing, it's very, very memorable, and it's a fucking cool scene. It really is pretty badass there, too.
And like I said, when Zorin leaves Mayday to die, and she actually says like, well, screw this, I'm going to help Bond get out so Bond can screw over him.
Yep.
I love that, and Grace Kelly, or not Grace Jones, sorry.
Grace Kelly.
It's very different.
Although Grace Kelly instead of Tanya Roberts would have been an improvement, but when it comes to Grace Jones, like I said, she is just a powerhouse in this, and just any movie she's in. I only know her being in Conan the Destroyer and this movie. I have to look up her IMDb one of these days, see what else she's in.
She was also a musician too, so she did her own version of Demolition Man and a few other songs too.
Okay.
So she's kind of like what you would call maybe a crossover artist in a sense.
The Eiffel Tower scene, because I remember, I think she used the sniper rifle. She shot and killed somebody.
The lesson here today is to always check the back of your car. multiple times you would just sneak up.
Yeah, she had the cables. Yeah, she was choking people. That's right. Like I said, it's all coming back to me now.
Well, let me put this out there for you guys to respond to, because to me this is a classic part of Bond where the movie starts off strong and progressively gets weaker towards the end. Not all Bond films are like, but for me a lot of them are. And so, like I've always said, I prefer more of the detective and spying stuff rather than action stuff, despite the fact that the scene at the Eiffel Tower is incredible. But when he meets Stacy, which is the name of the Tanya Roberts character, the Bond, my problem isn't that I don't think she can act or isn't good looking or anything like that.
It's the dialogue.
She's just an ordinary woman. There's nothing spectacular about her.
Geologist, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just so he doesn't seal the deal with her, so to speak, early on, and so he's kind of like, what? And so if we find out that Zorn's trying to cut her a check, buy her family's business, and that leads into the other stuff about it, which I don't have a problem with. But here it just starts to fall apart to me. It just kind of bogs down whenever she's on screen.
He has her family business. She still holds the last of her shares, though. It's not a controlling share, but it's pretty much the last bit that she has any chance to fight. So Zorn's basically trying to say, hey, take the money, go away.
Yeah, kill her off. Bond, I remember, Bond also gets framed because Bond kidnaps her, basically, pretty much.
No. Bond gets framed for murder. Bond gets framed for murder with her because they go break into the city hall to acquire the information of Zorin's mining operation. Because that's
okay, because that's what it is. It's a January 6th thing. Okay, never mind. No, he's a British guy in America. Of course, he's gonna get blamed. We don't like Brits.
My name is Bond, James Bond. Yeah, and I'm Dick Tracy. You're still under arrest.
Well, Pixel, you're the guy that has the biggest boner for Christopher Walken. I don't know why, and I just understand it. So sometimes being
He's
accepting.
not the only one, bro.
He's just
Well,
got.
what do we think of him as a villain? Seriously,
Seriously,
I'm a little bit on the fence because there are weaker elements compared to other Bond villains. He's not the strongest, but his performance is still memorable. Like him in the board meeting, and does anybody else want to drop out after they threw the Asian guy out? It's hilarious.
that's
But
cute. Yeah, it's not
yeah.
scary or anything.
No,
I would
he's
say,
not scary at all, but he's just a fun maniac. You
I
can
would
tell
say
as he's shooting out, he's just having the time of his life.
the fight scene on the Golden Gate Bridge towards the end. Like I said, he's crazy, but like I said, but he's is a we all know like the real threats. Like in look at we're like, oh, Goldfinger, he's a great villain. It's Oddjob who's actually better than Goldfinger. Oddjob is the one that that goes around killing people. Goldfinger is just kind of like hires people.
But Goldfinger has all the performance. He has all of
Sure.
that charm.
It's like
about him.
It's like Blowfart. It's like he's a guy with a damn cat, and then you see then he gets killed off in the helicopter. No, dies. Like I said, as far as the villains go, there's a lot of bad villains there in the Bond stuff. But as far as people remember, though, it's Oddjob and Jaws, and maybe Blowhart, or Blowfart, whatever his name is.
Blofeld.
Blowfart, I call him. He's just not that great. He was mysterious. He was like Dr. Claw and Inspector Gadget.
Well, you bring up a point there because with
Yeah.
Christopher Walken, if he were a little bit more serious instead of goofy, it would have added a lot to the movie. Not that he has to be sinister, but the whole anybody else want to drop out? I mean, this is a guy that's jacked up, super smart. He is psychotic, but he plays it as a goof. And that's where I think it makes him very weak because certainly Walken's capable of giving you kind of this weird look on your face and everything else there too. And it just plays it like almost any other Bond villain, which up to this point, I think we're like the 17th, 18th movie in the Bond franchise.
14th.
It's 14th. Okay. So halfway approximately. You've got a template. At some point, I would think if you're going to be in a Bond film, you go, how am I going to make it different? I know I'll dye my hair blonde. Well, you do something else, Christopher. Come on.
Well, the thing is that you expect that he got hired for that. He was going to put this in there. Like I said, he got hired probably because his performances. He's as of lately, like he's really gone into comedic performances. But I mean, they probably knew when they hired him. When they hired him, they hired him for a specific reason. The way his portrayal's in there. It's not because it's just a random guy coming in and auditioning, and they write it for him. Like they.
And it is.
I don't think he had the leverage way. It's Bond.
He probably
not necessarily true, but I would think back then they would have had a little bit more flexibility because of the profile of somebody that you're bringing in, unless the heaviest, basically a no name that they don't really put a lot of effort into. I think this movie tried to do the best it can to make Roger Moore look as good as possible, being almost 60 years old. In that they did succeed. I don't think he's bad in it at all.
By 1985, what was Christopher Walken really in?
Lots of things, actually. And he'd also been known not just from doing movies, but I think he was a professional tap dancer. He had been, was it Broadway? Obviously, he'd been in the Dead Zone and a few other things too. So he was, how do I say it? Christopher Walken really became Christopher Walken like in the late 90s when another generation of people started just seeming to like him. He started doing all these movies and a lot of those, the Prophecy films and everything too. But the guy had been around since the 70s, easy.
Yeah, but I'm just saying his star power, he probably, compared to Roger Moore at that time, wasn't that.
Star power.
Yes, Pixel. But like I said, Roger Moore probably had more control. It was his last film. He's older, so they probably wanted him for one last thing, and they probably had to pay him a lot of crap money to do one last film. So, and he probably, who knows, maybe he wanted a lesser known person, or so. Hey, I like this guy. I see him in this. Let's bring him in. And then it's all down to the writers. The writers probably had more leeway, and like I said, who knows why he was the way he was. Like I don't think he had the star power to come in and be like, I'm gonna make it funny because that's what I'm gonna do because I'm Christopher Walken. At that time, he was just known as the Dead Zone guy.
He'd
Or
been in Heaven's Gate. He was
yeah.
almost Han Solo. He was in stuff for 10 plus years. He was not a no-name guy.
So so reading into it, David Bowie was the original Zoran, but he later pulled out because he didn't want to spend 5 months watching a stunt double fall off cliffs. It was offered to Sting, and Sting didn't want it, so then it went to Walken.
So
Wow.
yeah,
What a jump!
like I said, this was like very comparable to Diamonds Are Forever. You know, Bond, and then what the next Bond film was Timothy Dalton.
Nope.
Or about no, Timothy Dalton came in like 2 years later.
No, after this film, yes.
Yeah, I said after that. Like I said Timothy Dalton was the next Bond, and then you could tell the Bond films after that kind of just went away for 5 years till Brosnan. Like I said, they're kind of winding down. You know, I mean, people.
Well, I find it interesting that when we're talking about Christopher Walken, we're talking about him. We're not talking about Max Zorn. I mean, that perfectly, I think, illustrates my point that he's a very forgettable bad guy in a Bond film. He's just another dude.
Like most of them are.
I don't disagree.
Guy Moonraker, I don't even know what his name is. the villain that was in From Russia from Love. I don't remember what his name was. I don't. A lot of the main villains.
Drax. Oh, you loved Hugo Drax, Rob.
I did. I think he's tremendous.
Like I said, a lot of you talk about the main villains, the main Bond villains. I know Doctor No and Goldfinger, and Blofeld. Those are the three, and the henchmen are Jaws and Oddjob, you know, and Grace Jones' character. But I said, like it said, a lot of these, unless you're watching it, I mean, and it's it's fresh in your memory, you don't really remember these villains' names.
Well, if you think about some of the names that you talked about, Oddjob, Scaramanga, a lot of them have a uniqueness to them or a title, and of course, the women's names by this point are starting to not be called something as obvious as Holly Goodhead, right? I mean, so May Day's a cute little name, but it's certainly not sexually suggestive in any case. And Max Zorn, I'm like, okay, Maxie, I mean, come on.
Pussy Galore, because they had the most the memorable names, the Bond girls.
But there's still Miss Ginny Flex in this movie. Let's not forget her.
Robert Davi's character, which comes in later, is probably a better villain.
Absolutely, without question.
Yeah. And then you have his henchman, Benicio del Toro.
Yeah.
He doesn't even have a name in the movie for us, but you remember he's being in there. Like I said, there's some more memorable villains, but Max is like, oh, that's the Christopher Walken film. That's what you know this movie is. And
some people think it's the Duran Duran movie too, because the song was very popular.
Dude, what was the other one? Paul McCartney was before this one. Was it Paul McCartney before or after?
That was before this. That was early Roger Moore.
Okay, because they had Live or Let Die. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I mean, for me personally, comes to Bonds, I know the Bond actors, and then I know like the songs. It's like some of the villains, but the main villains, they're throwaways.
One element we didn't talk about is the opening gambit, which we usually talk about the gun barrel sequence and everything. And Bond is skiing, which usually tells you it's going to be a strong movie. I mean, it's just one of those things where when the Beach Boys came on, I remember in the audience was kind of like, all right, it's going to be one of those Bond films, not as over the top as Moonraker, but not as serious as some of the other ones. And the interesting thing about Moore is that just 2 films ago, For Your Eyes Only, it's probably one of the more serious Bond films in quite a long period of time, seriously, and very little goofs and all that too. And to me, that's an extremely very strong Bond film, and they decided to do that, to your point, RDB, because of how goofy Moonraker was, and so they're like, okay, we're gonna go back to its roots and all that. And I'm like, well, how long did that last? Because Octopussy was a little bit of a goof of a film, although somewhat fun, and then you get this one, and it's like, boy, that only lasted for 1 film. You should have stuck with the friggin' formula because it was friggin' an awesome film. But then you get this.
Like this movie here, it's obviously it's a much older Roger Moore. Tanya Roberts is half his age. It was kind of creepy. Him like trying to hit on her.
That's never creepy.
That's never
Come
creepy.
on. It's never.
No,
No.
sorry, it is. I mean, it was. But I said I like the fact that he was more active in this. He was more fight and less romance.
Yeah, I agree with you on that because I think that was one of the elements that people might have fallen a little bit not creepy, but just not believable.
Yeah.
I do think that the fact that they focused more on the spy stuff early on, going undercover, checking out the horses, realize they're being doped up, and that's like a byproduct of the fact that this was part of human experimentation, which they don't delve into, but explains Mayday's background on Zorn's. Okay, but what is he up to? They hold that from you for a while, which is cool because then once you know, you're like, oh, okay, they're going to blow up Silicon Valley. The problem with some of the Bond films with some of these big things, I go back to, I think it's Homeland season 1, where the guy's a sniper and he's over there and he comes back and you find out he's a Muslim and they wonder if he's been turned or not. And at the end of the first season, he's like in a party at the White House and there's a bomb in it and he's going to blow it up. And they leave it at that. They should have blown it up. I mean, because then the rest of it just goes downhill. But they don't have the urge to do it. And I thought, I know it wouldn't have been a happy film and you want to give the audience what they want, but if they did something at the end where maybe one of them goes off, or I don't know, just give us a spectacle, maybe, because the thing that makes it fall apart for me, the third end, is not the fact that it's just an action sequence. I just think the fighting and the idea of it I think is better than the execution. The having the confrontation on the Golden Gate, the blimp and all that. It was hard to, even by Roger Moore standards, let that go. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I don't really get it though, because I enjoyed, like, he was on the rope, and then whenever Max goes ahead and tries to just crash him into there and leave him stranded, he ties it into a knot and it's pulling against it, making the blimp wrap around. I loved it. Like, it's a spectacle, yes, but it's far more believable than anything we saw in Moonraker.
I mean, one could argue the reason that this was kind of a weaker act because Bond's old. He could perform for so long.
Yeah. No, you're right. I don't disagree.
Yeah.
And unfairly or not, I think what happens is because of people that were big Roger Moore fans, they were going to get a bit more of that Roger-tainment, that little bit of a goof stuff. And he can do both, but he's known for silly, stupid stuff. And unfortunately, anybody else, he's been saddled with some parts in some films that are just kind of, it's that British humor.
It makes sense. Rob wanted more and we got less.
But, because it's one of those things that we do think about Rob whenever we're watching these. He gets laid the most in this movie. 3 for 3.
Getting your DNA in the future is everybody's business. That's the human nature side of it from the man and a woman. So he just had to prove himself.
I do like having Bond being in America. Whenever you see Bond in America, how often do you see that in the Bond movies where he goes to America?
Yes. No, I agree with you. That was a plus.
That's cool. That's usually
and globetrotting Bond's always fun in different locales that are really different from each other. That's always cool.
To me, it's always fun when he meets Felix Leiter.
Yes.
So that's always my favorite thing. It's like, because the Brit, he's got his certain charms, and then here comes the American. Oh, you guys are always so bullheaded and rash. Then here's Bond. He's like, classy, but Bond's just like them, but won't admit it.
Well, the thing too, Felix Leiter, I mean, he's played by different people over the course of the Bond franchise. And speaking of 5 years ago, since that phrase was brought up earlier, 5 years ago when the last Bond film came out, really one of the worst ones of all time, a lot of people then started going, yeah, they killed him off, they didn't need to, and they killed off Felix Leiter, didn't need to. Oh, well, advances the story because Bond. No, they did it, and you could tell they took a perverse joy in it. So people get attached to these side characters, so even then they don't want to see them get messed with as much, and there's no need for it. Felix has been there since, I think, Dr. No, the very first one, and whether it's Jack Lord or him or who would play him later, who cares? It's like Q. You think of the wisecracking Q, not the goofy kid that nobody knows anything about. Q. It's tough when you have a franchise for so long to kind of reestablish new roles in the middle of it without keeping some air of the original characters.
When you say Q, you're talking about the older Q, not
the gadget guy,
not the prequels, because that's what Daniel Craig was. His prequels.
Well, it was starting.
It was
that
re-imaging.
Yeah, reboot.
It was to be a reboot, and it. In all honesty, you might as well just consider it that. Just its own little span of movies that just don't understand Bond.
Like I said, Pierce Brosnan's were the last strong Bond movies. Casino Royale, though, I did like, though.
Casino Royale is tremendous, actually.
Yeah.
And even though they had part of a bigger story going on with Spectre, like Blofeld was merely a front for Spectre. So in the early Bond films, you had the lead guy who had henchmen, but it was all part of the boss chain, and the hidden entity that Bond would go up against was like a government agency in a sense. And that was kind of the interesting thing about those early films, because that's based out of the war and everything that Ian Fleming grew up through. And you kind of lose sight of that. That's why I thought it was interesting in this one with the whole Nazi kind of background of human genetics and everything. Because again, at the time, other than the early mid 70s when McNamara report came out, people started finding out stuff about like Project Paperclip and Hydra and all these other types of government things where you're like, holy shit, the government really did do all these horrible things to its own people. It wasn't really commonplace to think of that. So it still had some power. Plus in the 80s with this whole rampant Americanism going on and sense of positivity, commies were the bad guys. So that was supposed to add a little heft to it, but then you get Christopher Walken coming and smiling instead of being creepy, and it's like, okay, I guess I'll just do for a thing.
To me, his smiling was creepy. It was a creepy smile. It wasn't like a normal, hey, I'm happy. Let's go get the ice cream. No, we're gonna get ice cream. I'm gonna give you cyanide in your ice cream. Creepy.
You know?
You know what? Let's bring this up too, because RDV, you typically don't join us for the Bond things, but you mentioned something about Casino Royale and the Pierce Brosnan films. A lot of people think, and there's a pattern to it, that the last film by any of the Bond actors, except for Timothy Dalton, because they only did 2, and Lazenby, who only did 1, that the last film was by far the worst. And so sometimes at the end of the range of films that say Connery did, Pixel and I would talk about kind of like a rough order of what we liked or which one we agreed was the strongest or the weakest. And I don't know if this is Moore's weakest film. It's not a horrible film. And he spanned a long period of time. I think 72, 73 is the first one. So this is a good 10, 12 years.
They all run together for me. But man, I love Octopussy. There's some of the songs in there. But I could say that you could say that might be a little weaker than this.
Okay.
But like I said, I can't remember which ones where it starts and where it's with Moore. Moore is what Live and Let Die. That's his
Man with the Golden Gun.
Golden Gun was really good. I like that. I actually had a solid Bond girl assistant, helping him out with it. So then the guy talking, "Hey boss, the plane." I'm trying to think what else he had. He had
The Spy Who Loved Me.
Which a lot of people consider one of the best Bond films.
Yeah.
And then Moonraker. And then For Your Eyes Only.
Moonraker is. I think people like Moonraker because it's like, let's recreate Thunderball, but like we're doing it in space instead of where Thunderball, the underwater fight scene. But Moonraker does it in space fight scene.
Well, the Bond template, all of them are basically remakes. Yeah.
So. But like I said, I'd have to go back. I haven't watched these in a while, man.
Right.
I own all these in VHS. That's the last time I watched a lot of these.
God, okay, yeah.
I got the Brosnan collection VHS. Actually, the Brosnan's is the first one on DVD. The other ones, Connery, are on VHS, bro. So it's been a while since I watched them. But like I said, Connery's always been my favorite. Moore was like, it's like basically we're just getting the Saint. That's what I felt like a little bit. Roger Moore was the romance guy, the pretty boy, where Connery was like a balance of both to me.
Interesting.
So like I said, Moore. Like I said, we've talked about this before on this channel before. Rob, you being the Roger Moore fan, I'm more the Connery fan. And of course, when we had Angleton on here, he was the Brosnan fan.
And I'm George Lazenby all the way, boys.
Who? What? Who's that?
He's the guy that did On Her Majesty's Secret Service between Connery and Moore. He did one film, and that was
Bond film. The best Bond film.
He was like the guy, the Canon search, at the mall. They're like, let's get George.
Right. He was an Australian male model who walked in there, didn't know anything about it, and bullshitted his way to the leading role. That's exactly what happened.
That's basically that's everything you need to know. Like he literally went ahead and he was a spy to become a spy.
So based on that, we can get Liam Hemsworth or Chris Hemsworth to be the next Bond.
Stop it.
That's why I didn't like George Lazenby, because I was like, Bond's married. Oh, and then his wife dies, and it's like, okay, cool.
Listen, it's the only Bond movie with any kind of like actual emotional edge to it.
Like that movie should have been a flashback. Did you ever married? Yes, one time, and it's like a 5-minute thought bubble, and it's gone.
Well, that's what happens at the beginning of Your Eyes
Yeah.
Only. He's visiting his grave of Tracy and all that too,
Yeah.
and that's the last time you see Blofeld, and that's why he picks him up and dumps him off. Plus, there had something to do with like movie rights and stuff, and there was issues with things, so
Yeah.
they decided, hey, let's just kill him off and get going with that. And they didn't re-image the Bond, but they wanted, like I say, get a bit more serious, and that's why they did that. So if you don't know anything about all the backstory, and you get to watch, you're like, who the hell is this bald guy? In the helicopter thing, even though it's a fantastic action sequence.
I think
That's just how it is. Bond was a crossover between both of those sets.
is the one where Bond or Moore dresses up as a clown in the circus. Is that the one before this?
That's Octopussy, yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Where he puts the guy through the tunnel.
That Fabergé egg, yeah, he's the whole thing. The female group at the end fighting and all that with him too.
Yeah. The circus.
Yeah. All right. Go ahead.
They're cutesy movies with Roger Moore. Like that. This was more like, this is like, hey, we're gonna have Roger Moore, but we're gonna the cutesy. We're gonna have him be more fighting stuff. Only to be outshined by Grace Jones.
He wasn't outshined by Grace Jones.
Yeah, I'm with Pixel on this. I think she stands out. I think the problem is that she outshines Christopher Walken in here. And I don't even think that's debatable. He's just sort of there, and we're like, the more you watch, you're like, yeah, she's into her role. Christopher Walken's just there.
She is the ebony to my ivory.
Pixel, you say more. She's like the Mercy Graves to Lex Luthor. She does all the work, and Lex kind of like flees.
Wow. I don't think it's fair to say Lex just flees, but yeah, no, basically, yeah.
Jimmy Flex.
That was the formula for the animated series, for Superman series. For those who didn't watch it, I probably didn't watch it, but yeah, it's Lex Luthor, who's the smartest man alive, but he's like, Mercy, protect me, and she gets instantly knocked out.
The question is, are we going to go back because we skipped over and Never Say Never Again?
Well, we'll never say never again.
Never say never again. That's an interesting poll. If we're going to do that, we will do that separately. And the reason why we skipped over it is because technically,
it's not.
It is James Bond,
but it's not.
It is James Bond,
but it's not.
Just like Casino Royale with Peter
Sellers. But is it continuity though? Is it
I'm trying to explain it.
Yeah.
There was a Casino Royale with Peter Sellers that was a comedy movie that a lot of people want to forget. And then with this one, there was an issue with the rights of who owned it and also with the screenwriting. So Thunderball kind of like came open, and whoever had the rights for it said, no, I'm going to do it. And that was one of Connery's favorite films. And so they redid it because what the fuck, you're Connery, you can do what you want. And so that happened to have come out at the same time. And it's tough because it is James Bond, but most people don't recognize it as being James Bond because Moore was playing at the time. And that one year, 1983, with Octopussy, I clearly remember you had two James Bond films the same year. Yep. And it's a tremendous remake of Thunderball, but it's something as a one-off, to answer your question there, Pixel, that I definitely think needs to be answered, because how do you break it all off? I mean, obviously there is a certain sense of rebooting the character and everything, like with Daniel Craig and even Pierce Brosnan, right? So whether that works or not, I don't know, and it's hard because it's hard not to compare eras, right? I mentioned Q earlier. It's hard not to mention the way that the Bond girls change, as well as the villains and the plots. And to your point, RDV, the plot here of him, doing more detective stuff, maybe less action, but still doing both. He can do action, but it's the weakest part for me of his repertoire, and unfortunately gets exposed a little bit here, maybe because of his age. And the idea, like I said, I thought was better than the execution. And it is kind of odd to see a 60-year-old man creeping on a 25-year-old. I can understand that sentiment too, but it's James Bond, and it's hard because in some of the scenes he looks his age, in other ones he doesn't. It's just that's how it is, and that's But people let Roger Moore go because he built up so much goodwill up to this point,
And they said this for being 80s films too, that really helped out too, because 80s, as far as the culture, everything around it, it was James Bond. You're getting the 80s. It's Roger Moore coming back, and whether you liked him before or not, it was the soundtrack really helped with Duran Duran.
Yes.
Really brought people in. Like I said, and it was like, this is more his last film. They're like, oh shit, we gotta go see this one, you know?
Yeah.
That really helped out. And then like nobody knew who was gonna be the next Bond was. So it's like, so everyone was talking after watching this movie. It's like, who's gonna be the next Bond?
Well, Dalton had been involved, and I think he knew the Broccoli family personally for quite some time, but he always felt like he was too young to do it. But actually, in all seriousness, Remington Steele had been going strong at this point. Everybody thought that it should have been Pierce Brosnan. I don't know if he had tried out already or not, because I didn't watch Remington Steele, but everybody watched Remington Steele and loved it, men and women. And I always thought he was a little pretty and prissy, and I never watched it because I was into more harder stuff, I thought, at the time. But obviously, we'll be talking a lot of Pierce Brosnan here over the next year or two.
I like Brosnan. Brosnan was a combination of Connery and Moore. The way he did
and there's all these ways that they interpret the James Bond character, right? How realistic do we want to get? How dark do we want to get? How are they compared to the books? Because a lot of people realize that they only get a part of it from the book, and they make up the rest. And the fact that it was in America, I think, too, that you mentioned.
People forget about this. So it's like with Dalton, those two movies, they decided after this, they're like, we're anti-smoking now. We're also drinking. You know.
Which is bullshit.
Yeah, and that was the first time. It's like, oh, why are you guys even doing this crap? What are you catering to? Everybody's out there's got a pack of Camels, man. They're drinking Miller. It's like, or they got the Budweiser stuff. It's like they got the Hams, beer. Like I guess it didn't make sense. Like I said, this was probably one of the last good Bond films from the 80s.
He didn't smoke at all in this movie.
No, but he's referring to Timothy Dalton, who tried taking it more serious, but bookish version take on James Bond.
Yeah.
Well,
now, Pixel, go ahead.
I just wrapping up, you mean?
Yeah, final thoughts.
Yeah.
I was really surprised. The View to a Kill is very solid, and I'm the only one on the panel that actually doesn't like the song. I don't like that song at all. And actually, it's the weakest part of the opening, because the opening is neat. I just cannot stand this. No. Like, I hear it on the radio sometimes, and it's just, I've never liked it.
What I didn't like about it, Pixel, was they kind of goofed with the video or whatever, where Simon Le Bon would come out and he'd be like, Bon, Simon Le Bon. And it's like, oh, Jesus Christ, you guys are doing a theme song. Come on, man.
Well, they did that in the music video itself.
That's what I'm saying, right?
Corny, but the actual song, that's up in music. They don't say that,
I know. I know.
So, and I don't.
Movie.
Next, you're gonna tell me you hate Def Leppard.
Not a big fan of them. Well, Duran Duran's got a whiny voice. The guy can't sing. He's more of a. He's definitely a pop English.
I'm being personally attacked here because I'm a Duran Duran fan.
So I don't know why you're feeling personally attacked. I'm talking about Duran Duran and not you.
Because you're talking about a band that I love.
Okay, so sorry you're getting all butthurt about it.
Who said it sucks? If you bring it up that sucks, then I'd
Pixel
say
did. I didn't say I loved it either, Pixel. I just said it was really popular at the time. That's all I said.
I know.
I know,
right?
Well, I thought you did say that you liked the song.
No, I agree with you. I'm not biggest fan of the song or opening. It's not as it's a nice like house track or something like that. It just doesn't seem huge and big compared to some of the other powerhouse tunes that we've had. But it was a very 80s song. This feels like a very 80s Bond. I can definitely say that. I don't know that you can. It definitely has an 80s tinge to it that might make it better or worse depending on when you're viewing it, as opposed to some other films that, other than it being dated because of technology, you could go, well, some of the pop culture stuff's not embedded in it, like the idea of Silicon Valley, for example.
View to a Kill gets me more amped up, where I'm watching like nobody does it better than I'm falling asleep.
I am too with that one. As far as Simon, that's a snoozer. I agree.
I disagreed there too. But anyway, this is a really solid film. I was surprised by how solid. The title sucks too, though. A View to a Kill. I don't like it. Like they say it in the movie, and it's like, oh.
Alrighty.
But no, this movie itself is really great. It's a strong finish for this Bond before we go into a new. Can we call it era if it's only 2 movies?
Yeah, I think you can.
Okay, a new era.
Because of the strength of one of them in particular, when we talk Timothy Dalton, and how much of a difference they are compared to the other two previous, or really three previous Bonds.
Well, we're going to see hopefully soon. But yeah, no, I really do enjoy A View to a Kill.
The one thing I will agree with both you guys on, typically, like I say, there's this idea that the last Bond film of one of the Bond actors is the worst. Definitely not the case here. I think it is a solid film. I'm not fond of the ends, but that's just the way the Bond template goes. And I could say that about all the Bond films, but I did not look at this and go, "Oh, Roger, you stayed one movie too long." I think he successfully pulled it off, and despite his age, I still thought he was very, very good on it. And he didn't go out like a bitch or anything like our last one did over 5 years ago, which means it'll be 5 more years before the next Bond, and we won't like anything about the new one. But that's neither here nor there, and I'm sure we'll still review it here on the Xtreme Movie Show. For Professor Pixel and RDV, I'm your host, Rob. Thanks for checking out our James Bond asymmetric scheduling, going in order of all the films. Who knows when the next one's going to be, but we'll be definitely going into the Timothy Dalton one. We might actually, even before that, do Never Say Never Again, because it technically is Bond and it's Connery. Damn it, you can't pass that up. It's such a winning combination every single time. So for both guys here, have fun. Good night. Stay extreme. Good night now.
This was not a Christopher Walken production, but I was there.